Well, it's a lovely evening on our porch. We just finished dinner, so I thought it would be a great time to tell a story to my family. And my audience tonight is my daughter Emily and my husband Mike. And film credits go to my daughter Emily.
Yay!
So my story tonight was written by Charles Perrault, and he was a Frenchman who lived in the 1600s. And he started out his career as a lawyer, but then he became well known for his writings. And his most famous writings are his fairy tales. And his fairy tales had purpose because most all of his stories had at least one moral in them. And I'm sure you're very familiar with some of the fairy tales that he wrote. Stories like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and Puss in Boots and, of course, Little Red Riding Hood. The Ridiculous Wishes was written by Charles Perrault and published in 1693. Originally, it was a verse narrative. And this story has been told in many different versions and in many different countries down through the years. But the version that I'm going to tell tonight is called The Three Wishes, retold by Jane Carruth in the book My World of Fairy Tales. Once upon a time, there was a poor woodcutter who was forever complaining. It's true, although he worked extremely hard, he had very little to show for it. He had a small cottage on the edge of the forest that he could call his own, and he had a wife. One day, this woodcutter was out in the forest felling trees. As the trees came crashing down, the woodcutter mumbled aloud, "Work, work, work. Nothing but work. It's not fair, I tell you. It's just not fair." Now, the more the woodcutter grumbled, the less he felt like working. And at last, he threw his axe down on the ground, ready to give it up altogether. As soon as he did this, there was a brilliant flash of light and a mighty clap of thunder. And there, towering over him, was the mighty great god of heavens, Jupiter himself. I'm sorry if I've said anything to offend you, began the woodcutter, stammering. I really didn't mean to. I have heard your complaints, thundered the god. I have appeared before you today to grant you 3 wishes. You must think long and careful about your wishes, because once they are granted, they will happen the very instant they are made. Jupiter vanished before the woodcutter had a chance to pull himself together, but once he realized the implications of the words of the gods, he gave a great shout of joy, "Woohoo!" and ran helter-skelter to his cottage to tell his wife. "Our fortunes are made!" he cried as he burst into the cottage. "Wife, wife, where are you? I have news to tell you." As his wife came running, the woodcutter gasped, "Heap logs on the fire! Bring out the wine! We are going to be rich beyond our dreams." Almost as excited as he was, the woodcutter's wife, Hannah, put logs on the fire and brought out the wine that she had been keeping for Christmas. When she had finished, she sat down opposite her husband and begged him to tell her the good news. "The great god of Jupiter has spoken to me," said the woodcutter, trying to keep his voice low and matter of fact. "I met him while I was in the forest." "Good heavens!" cried his wife, bitterly disappointed. "What nonsense is this? As if life isn't hard enough. Now I am married to a madman." "I'm not mad," he said. "Listen, Hannah, while I was out in the forest just now, Jupiter appeared to me. There was a flash of light and a clap of thunder, and there he was. I tell you, my legs were like jelly at the sight of him, but I stood up to him like a man." "I can imagine," said his wife scornfully. "Well, What did he have to say to you? Well, he praised me for my hard work, said the husband slyly, and then he granted me 3 wishes. Her husband spoke so earnestly that in spite of herself, Hannah began to believe him. She poured him a glass of wine and begged him to continue. He granted me 3 wishes, he repeated. We can ask for anything we want. Of course, we'll ask for money and maybe a new house. And I can have a big, fat diamond ring, interrupted Hannah, getting quite carried away. And a carriage and a coat with real fur? I said 3 wishes, laughed her husband as he began to warm his hands by the fire. We mustn't rush into this. We must think very carefully about our wishes. I tell you what, let's think about them the rest of the day, and we'll make our wishes tomorrow. You are right, husband, said his wife. You speak true words of wisdom. Let me go fetch your slippers, and I'll fill your pipe. At peace with the world, the woodcutter put on his slippers, leaned back in his chair, and remarked, You know, Hannah, I wish we had a string of fat, juicy sausages cooking in the pan to eat to go along with our wine. No sooner had the woodcutter spoken the words than to his immense surprise, a snake-like string of sausages moved across the floor towards him. Hannah cried out in anger more than fear, because being more quick-witted than her husband, she realized what had just happened. Fool, she screamed, idiot, you have thrown away one of our precious wishes. We could have had anything. We could have had money, a house, jewels, anything. And instead, you wish us a string of sausages? Her husband hung his head as the flood of harsh words washed over him. But Hannah was not to be silenced. She cried out again, You stupid, foolish, thoughtless imbecile. It's a pity I ever married you. Well, the husband was very discouraged that he had already blown one of his wishes. But he was very stung by her harsh words, so he got up out of his chair and cried out in anger. Woman, hold your tongue. Upon my soul, I wish that string of sausages was dangling from the tip of your nose. That would teach you to keep your mouth shut. No sooner had the woodcutter spoken the words than the sausages, in an instant, fastened themselves on the tip of the woodcutter's wife's nose. The sight was so comical that the woodcutter burst out into laughter. Ha ha! He chortled. Well, if that just isn't a fine way to keep a woman from opening her mouth. Hannah wept silently. At the sight of her tears, the woodcutter thought that it was no longer funny. Indeed, he began to feel very miserable himself. I'm sorry, Hannah, he said at last. I have just wasted the second of our 3 wishes, and I have nothing to show for it except a string of sausages. He stood there thinking for a moment. Then he remembered all the fun times they had enjoyed together when they were young. No, he couldn't leave his wife like that for the rest of her life. It's like this, Hannah, he said slowly. We could hide ourselves away for the rest of our lives, for I'm not sure I care to be seen in high society with a wife who has a string of sausages dangling from her nose. Or, He paused unkindly, and his wife began to sob even louder. Or, he repeated, I could use the last of our 3 wishes and make those sausages disappear. What shall I do? Hannah's eyes were so pleading that her husband stopped teasing her. With a sigh that echoed around the room, her husband said slowly, I wish those sausages would go back to where they came from. So, that was the end of the woodcutter's dreams. He had wasted all 3 of his wishes. Never again would he dare to grumble about how unfair life was, for he had had a wonderful chance and thrown it all away. But this much is true. Hannah was so grateful to be herself again that she stopped scolding her husband and began to treat him better. The end.